I don't have to be at this mic, do I? So I may stand off so I can see my slides. But before I jump in, I want to just say that what I share with you this morning comes from my experience. As was mentioned, we spent many of our years in West Africa. We also spent a number of years in the Middle East. And so what I'm going to share flows from our experience. Now, I think one of the three taglines for this conference, one of them was education. I think education, fellowship. What was the first one? Inspiration. On the education side, I'm going to share with you from our experience, but I don't want to prescribe and tell you exactly how to do things. What I want to inspire you to do is to think about things. So just because we do something this way, or I work with World Vision now, if World Vision does something this way, I'm not trying to suggest you need to do it that way, but to try to inspire and stimulate your own thinking so that you can see how God leads you in the circumstances that you confront. I've been asked to share a little bit about World Vision, the organization I work for, which is a Christian humanitarian organization. And then I'm going to segue into talking about engaging with government entities and some of the ups and downs of doing that. And I think I'm going to start first with an introduction to World Vision. Now I've got to get my technology going here. Where do I aim? Aim that way. It's working. Okay. So just a word about World Vision's identity. World Vision is a Christian humanitarian organization dedicated to working with children. We are a child-focused organization. But we also work with families, we work with their communities across the world to reach their full potential by tackling the causes of poverty and injustice. We are, of course, motivated by our faith in Jesus Christ. We serve alongside the poor and oppressed as a demonstration of God's unconditional love for all people. And I would just like to say the kind of work we do, when you're working with vulnerable communities, we often jump into it. But if there's one thing that is foundational to the work we do, it's a profound understanding of God's love for all people. We have to get that right at the beginning. Because you are going to encounter people, you're going to encounter communities that are not easy to get along with. You may think, well, this is brother or sister sandpaper, they rubbed me wrong. It is not easy work. Many of you have done this work before, you know that, and we have to step into this with a deep understanding of God's unconditional love for all people. As I said, we're very child-focused. At the core of what we do is to enhance the conditions of the children in these communities we serve. We do that through education and a number of other things, but at the core, it's the well-being of children that World Vision focuses on. We serve all people regardless of religion, race, ethnicity, or gender, of course. I think I'm going the wrong way here. Okay. We pursue our mission through what we call integrated holistic commitment to the following bullets. The first is transformational development, and that's where we do most of our funding goes. That's where we do most of our work, and I'm going to come back and unpack that a little bit for you. And that's the area that we work in that is most germane to, of course, this conference. But we also work in emergency relief. We do a lot of emergency relief in the Middle East and in other areas that have experienced tragedy and crisis. We work to promote justice, and this is, we seek to change unjust structures that affect the poor. We're involved in a lot of advocacy. We're involved in advocating for the poor, whether it's with groups like the United Nations, whether it's dealing with national governments. So we're very involved with promotion of justice around the world. We're very involved with partnershiping with churches in the places where churches do exist. We're also very involved in public awareness, which is somewhat related to the promotion of justice. We we are involved in public awareness that leads to informed understanding, informed giving and involvement, and of course, prayer. And then lastly, but not least, we witness to Jesus Christ by life, by deed, by word, by sign that encourages people to respond to the gospel. Let me pause here. How many of you have heard of World Vision before? Okay, great. All right. And I hope it's been positive. I'm not going to ask hands for that. We are a large organization, and we're certainly not a perfect organization, but God's hand has been upon it. Let me try to, let's see. I'm going the wrong way. I keep on going the wrong area. Okay, here's a map of where we work. We work in nearly 100 countries around the world. We work in what we call program areas. In each community each nation where we work, we establish area programs, which these area programs are the places where we focus our community development work. These program areas are population clusters of about 20 to 30,000 people. It may consist of a number of towns or villages. We have about 37,000 staff worldwide. It is a very large organization. Our funding comes from child sponsorship. Some of you may be aware of that. That may be how you know about World Vision. I'm sure some of you sponsor children through our sponsorship program. We sponsor today about 3.5 million children in the developing world. We also get funding from private donors. We get funding from grants that we apply for from foundations, and then multi and bilateral donors. A multilateral donor would be the World Bank, bilateral donors, USAID, or other similar institutions. And so our funding comes from mixed sources. Today, our annual revenue is about $3 billion, but that's not important. What's more important is the next number. We have a yield to programming of 87%. Basically, 87 cents out of every dollar goes directly to the field, and we are constantly trying to push that up. And it takes a lot of effort keeping overhead down. Going back to the area of transformational development, or our long-term development, and let me back up here. So when we go into an area in an emergency context, such as in the last 10 years, we've been very involved in Syria and Iraq, and those areas of the Middle East. When we go in an emergency context, we don't just go in there we do go in there to try to alleviate the immediate suffering, but we're working towards a long-term context. How do we not only help these people, but how do we shift them from an emergency humanitarian crisis into a place where they are developing for the long term? Now that can be difficult if you're dealing with displaced people, but if you're going into a crisis area where people are in their own homes and villages and communities, we're always moving out of as quickly as we can from an emergency context to a long-term, more sustainable development context. World Vision has chosen 5 main areas to work in. I think this is very important because years ago we used to try to do everything. And finally we sat down and thought, okay, what are we good at? What do we do well? What do we need to focus on, and what do we need to lay aside? And we chose these 5 areas. One is water, sanitation, and hygiene, better known as WASH. I lead that program for World Vision International. Last year, 2021, we were able to provide 3.4 million people with clean water. I still remember 20 years ago, and Joel, this is for you and your group. 20 years ago, World Vision drilled its first well in Senegal, West Africa. And I still remember, it was 25 years ago, almost 30. And I still remember that. We were thinking, yeah, this is a little bit off the norm. We don't do this very much, but this village needs water. And the community had asked assistance for water, and we drilled that well, and then a few other villages asked us to do the same. And it was a very modest start. But we prayed over this. We asked God to guide us. And it is one of the most humbling experiences of my life has been to watch the way God has blessed that humble beginning. Today, I don't say this a lot, but today I will say to you that World Vision is the largest provider of clean water in the world. And that is not because we are some excellent organization. That is because God's hand of blessing has been upon it. And so today we don't go around touting all the time, the extent of what we do. What happens is, and what we wrestle with is, Lord, how do we be good stewards of this opportunity? So 25, 30 years ago, we were looking for opportunities for where to drill a well here or there. Today, they're knocking our doors down around the world asking us, can you come here? Can you start a program here? We need water in this nation. We get calls from the UN. We get calls from the World Bank. We get calls from a lot of major players, and we can't do it all. The point is that God blessed our very humble beginnings in ways that we would have never imagined. We also work in health and nutrition. This is primarily because we're a child-focused organization. We particularly focus on the first 1,000 days of a child's life, which is when they're usually the most vulnerable. We, of course, work in education. We work in livelihoods. That's where sustainable agriculture falls. And then we work in child protection. Now, child protection is a little bit different. We work a lot with child trafficking, sex trafficking, trying to help change laws in nations that have laws that do not favor the protection of children. This is an area, again, not an area we talk about a lot, but it is one of the areas where we are busiest in trying to protect vulnerable children around the world from exploitation. And it's not just sexual exploitation, it can be child labor issues, and of course the list goes on. World Vision does very little bricks and mortar. Like with education, we no longer build schools. We used to build schools. We stay away from bricks and mortar. The closest thing to bricks and mortar we do now is drilling a well and equipping it with a pump. But we very quickly turned that over to the local community and to the local government for maintenance and long-term management. So we don't do a lot of bricks and mortar. In education, we work a lot with teachers. We work a lot with strengthening them, supporting them, facilitating them. We work a lot in the area of curriculum and literacy, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see, a sixth area that is not really a sector, but it functions similar to one. It's an area that actually is integrated to all five of these, and that's our faith integration. How do we integrate our Christian faith into the development process? And we have a very large team that works, what we call our faith and development team, where we look at issues, we partner with churches, we engage with faith leaders around the world, we look at the impact of our Christian witness. So that's actually kind of sits as a sixth area, but it's really integrated into these five. A word about partnerships. We have learned that we can't do this alone. Partnering is so important, and I would say that over the last 30, 40 years, a lot of Christian organizations don't have a good history of this, because a lot of Christian organizations go into a country and think, well, God has called us to do this, God has called me, God's called our organization, and we don't have time to be involved with other people. We've got our objectives, we've got our goals, and we are going to focus on what God's called us to do without really trying to think, how do we do this together with other organizations and other entities? But the bottom line is we can't do it all, and we have to learn how to partner. We have to learn how to partner strategically. World Vision partners with institutions. We partner with governments, corporations, faith communities. and more. And we do it both at the global level, or at the global level. We do it at the regional level, and of course, very much at the local level, at the district and provincial level in the countries where we work. We most commonly partner with churches, again, in places where churches exist. There's many places we work where there is no church. We partner with non-governmental organizations. These are NGOs as an acronym. And we partner with international NGOs. World Vision is an international NGO, but we also partner with local NGOs. There are many indigenous national NGOs in most countries where we work that are formed. We look for them. We find the ones that we feel we can cooperate and work with. We work very closely, especially at the community level, with local associations. And I want to just let you know, there are a lot of local associations in all communities all over the world. What am I talking about? I'm talking about cooperatives. I'm talking about farmers associations. I'm talking about women's associations, even disability. In West Africa, you go to any town of any moderate size, there is an association of disabled persons. And so there's all these opportunities to tap into local knowledge that already exists, a resource of information dealing with the subject, whether you're dealing with farmers or disabled people or women's groups. It's very important to assess who they are and to find ways to work with them, and basically for community development to divide and conquer, to share responsibility and work together hand in hand. And of course, then there's government entities, and I'm going to segue into this in just a moment and talk a little bit about some of the ins and outs of engaging with government entities. Let me just sum this up a little bit. I want to talk about what I've learned about community development my years with World Vision. I first joined World Vision in 1999 and have been working with them off and on since then. And there's four things that I would just summarize in terms of my own experience. One is being in the communities for the long term. World Vision no longer does a 1 or 2 year project. When we go into an area, establish an area program, we work with the government and the local community to an agreement that we will be in place between 10 to 15 years. Because if you're really going to grasp hands with the community on their journey of walking out of poverty together, it's going to take time. Changing people's behaviors. You may be able to erect a school in a few weeks, but changing people's behaviors and their social norms takes a lot of time. So a commitment to the long term reaps remarkable benefits. The second point I would say is trust building. Learning to build trust in the communities is so important. We don't go in there as the experts. You know, there's far too many organizations that parachute into the community. We're the experts. We're going to tell you what to do. We're going to tell you how to do it. We really don't care what you think because we know what you need. How would you feel if someone parachuted into your community and never asked you about your perceptions of how things work and what the needs are in the community and just said, we're going to do this? So building trust. And a lot of communities have, unfortunately, a past history of having people like this come into their communities. So you may find many communities that are very hesitant when you arrive. Building trust, getting them to really understand that you are there for the long term, that you genuinely love them, that you genuinely care about the community. And what is most important to you is their well-being, not being able to write a beautiful report back to your supporters in the U.S. You're not going to build trust when that's what you focus on. Thirdly, involvement of the community generates ownership. Whatever you do, education program, ag program, child protection program, water program, if the community doesn't own it, it's not going to be sustained. When you finally pack up and move on, when God calls you and your group to move on to another area, another community, will what you have done be sustained? at World Vision, we work with the community from the planning stage, through the design stage, through the implementation, all the way through to completion. And it's not a one-way process. We start with sitting down with the community saying, what's your felt need? What do you need? And of course, it's interesting there because about 8 to 9 times out of 10, they always start with water. If the community doesn't have water, so water is usually our first entry point. It's through water that we build the community's trust. It's through our water programs that they learn to understand who we are. They understand our ethos. They understand our values. And then right after that, usually education and health come and follow very, very quickly. The last thing I want to add here is remember that when you're working in community development, this is not about you. This is not your story. This is the story that God is writing in the hearts of these people you're serving. God has been at work among that community. I don't care if they're not a Christian community, they may be a Muslim or a Hindu community, but we all know that God is moving people, calling people towards himself. And he may send us in there as a part of that process. But the story that he is writing in that community is their story. And far too often we go in and we usurp the story. And we try to make it our story. We write these beautiful things in our letters back home, our wonderful reports. We did this, we did that, we built this. And we don't talk about the community. We don't talk about their story. So I encourage you, as you think about the work you do, how do you get out of your own story long enough to celebrate the incredible story that God's doing in that community? All right, I want to switch gears now. This talk is kind of split in two. I think I've got to 10 more minutes here? 20 minutes, good. So I'm going to segue into this notion of partnering, and especially to focus on partnering with government entities. And this is not something that excites a lot of people, but I think as we unpack some of the layers, you'll see how important it is. And I want to give you a little context here on partnering with government entities. 2 or 3 things here. First of all, when you work in any community, whatever country you're in, we saw the list, you had 5, 6, or 7, 8 up there. When you are there, you are a guest in this country. You are a guest in this country, and you are only there with the government's permission. Now, you may not think about that, but believe me, the government does. They know you're there. They know you're working in these communities. Some of you are chuckling because you've probably had some interesting interactions on that level, but they know you're there, and you are there with their permission. Number 2 is many Western missions and NGOs who do development work come with a very superior attitude. And as I said, unfortunately, many communities are tainted with that experience. And many of these Western organizations often begin engaging communities with no interest in engaging government entities. And I would just like to propose that, as organizations who do community development work in these nations, we need an attitude adjustment. We need an attitude adjustment. And when I'm referring to government entities, by the way, I'm referring to any type of government entity in the country at the national level. If you're dealing with agriculture, the Ministry of Agriculture, water, the Ministry of Water, all the way down to the district level, the provincial level, the district level, what we would call county agents, county ag agents. In most of these countries, there is a county ag agent, district agent, whether it's in health, whether it's in agriculture or water. These are all very important people to engage with. And lastly, along these lines, I would say we must adopt a posture of humility and a willingness to both learn and partner with these people. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Many of these agents have a lot more experience than you do in their local culture and context. Others have gone before you. There's much to learn from their successes as well as their failures. And it behooves us to adopt a posture of humility and engage them. The next few minutes, I want to talk about one, why should we engage with local government entities? And then in a few minutes, I want to switch over to some suggestions on how we can do this. And we're going to have some Q&A here, I think, right? Good. All right, why engage in local government entities? First of all, government institutions, imperfect as they are, they are there for the long term. NGOs and mission groups may come and go. You never know how long you will be there. But government institutions, imperfect as they are, will remain normally. Most national governments have detailed national, regional, and district or county level strategies, priorities, and standards for all aspects of community development work. If you go into a community in Nicaragua or Niger, I lived for 7 years in Niger, and I can assure you, if you go to the local ag office in the local county, the prefecture, and say, what's your national strategy for agriculture? Within 5 minutes, he'll pull it out. And he'll say, here it is. You know, in this county, we're focusing on this, we're focusing on that. And it behooves us to try to align our efforts to support those efforts. We need to be aware of what's the government trying. Now, the challenge with most governments, as you well know, is not developing a strategy or a plan, it's being able to fund it. And most governments are completely cash-strapped, as you know. And so they're delighted when you come, and especially delighted when your program can align with their strategies. And when you do that, you're going to get their support, which is, I think, my next point. When we align our efforts with theirs, we can expect their support. And often their support is needed. You may go into a community where the people want you there, they need you, they've expressed their gratitude for the work you're doing, but you may have a belligerent community leader. Maybe the chief of the village, for some reason, doesn't want a bunch of Christians working in his village. The government agent, if you're working in agriculture, the ag agent or the water agent or the community health person from the government can really support you and go before you and help pave the way for the work that you do. Our efforts, I firmly believe that our efforts as an organization, when we're in these countries, should include helping government entities. It's not just helping the community, but helping government entities which support community development to also develop and thrive. So when you have completed your years in Community X in this country, and God said, you've done your work, it's time to move on somewhere else, you look back, you want to look back and see a community that's thriving. If it's agriculture, you want to see sustainable agriculture that's thriving. You want to see children who are healthy because they're well nourished. But you also ought to want to look back and see the government agent is really a step ahead because of our presence. We were really able to help him or her develop. That should be part of what we think about. And of course, as I've already said, we have something to learn and they have something to learn. It's a two-way street. But perhaps more than anything else, I would say that when we can, we need to work to strengthen governments, local governments' capacities to support their communities. And I'm going to close in a minute with a story from West Africa where this happened. Continuing with the why, I'd like to look at some scriptural reminders. Why should we partner with government entities? We're busy there doing the Lord's work. Why should we be sidelined by having to deal with these folks? Romans 13:1, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. 1 Peter 2:13, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution. Titus 3:1, remind them to be submissive to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work. I want to try to wrap up with a few thoughts on how to engage government entities. Now, again, these are my suggestions. This is not a prescription. This is just to get your thinking. Some of these may work for you. Some of these may not work for you, but I would like to propose them. The first, inform yourself. When you go into a community, go in there and ask around, who's who here? You move into a community, you're planning to do an ag program or some other kind of program, find out who the local ag agent is. Find out what they're doing. Find out how long that person has been there. Find out where he or she is from. Are they from that community, or were they assigned there from some other very different community? How much do they know about the community? And learn about government plans. What's the government's plan for agriculture? What are they trying to do? Where are they trying to move agriculture? You know, you may find in one country that they're focusing on seeds, on providing, being sure that seeds are available or fertilizer are available. In another country or another district, the big issue with agriculture is farm to market roads. We can't get the produce out. We can't get it to a market. We need to build better roads. Find out what keeps them awake at night. Follow protocols. My friends, my fellow Americans, if there's anything that we fail to do in these countries, is follow protocols. We are a very loose culture here in America. But in most countries we work in, there are expected protocols. There are certainly cultural protocols, which you're probably more familiar with, but there are protocols with government entities. When you go into a community, I think you're working in Maradi, but that's not necessarily, that's Bible translation. But let's say you were doing an ag project in Maradi in Niger. One of the first things you should do is go and see the prefecture, the local governor, and introduce yourself and say, we're here. Our plan is to do this type of work. We wanted to introduce ourselves. Could you introduce us to the sub-governor or into the guy who's in charge of the district where we're planning to work? And he will gladly do so. Could you introduce us to the government, to the ag agents or to the health agents? Follow protocol. And the same if you're working in municipal areas. If you're working in a small township, go introduce yourself to the mayor. Because if you're trying to do community health work in a community, you're trying to help people advocate for their rights, you want a good rapport with the governor, because you're not going to do anything. You're not going to build a health clinic. Sorry, I said governor, the mayor. You're not going to build a health clinic in a municipality without the governor's approval, the mayor's approval. So go get to know the mayor. He'll be glad to know you're there. He'll be glad to know you're there trying to strengthen his community. And when you're with these people, always ask them their opinion. Don't just come in there and tell them what you're going to do. Start with saying, tell us about what's going on in agriculture in this district. Tell us what's going on in health. Listen to them. Then say, well, our capacity, our strength in agriculture is seeds or fertilizer or something. And we'd like to try to be able to play a part in supporting what you're trying to do. Can we talk about it? Develop personal relationships with your government counterpart. Don't just go in there the first week you get there and say hi and bye. Stop by regularly. Make it a priority, especially like ag agents or district agents. Get to know them. Have a cup of coffee together. Keep him or her abreast of what you're doing and the progress of your work. And as I've already said, communicate with them regularly. Now, here's a very important one. When it comes to protocol, most of these government entities appreciate having some type of memorandum of understanding or written plan for what you're going to do. They're bureaucratic, they're hierarchical, that's the way it works there. But it's always helpful to write to just draft up a memorandum of understanding of, we are here, this is who we are, this is our identity, we want to work in this area to develop agriculture in this community, in this aspect of agriculture, and here's how we plan to do it, and here is our proposed timeline. For the next 3 years or 5 years, we want to move into these phases, and this is what we like to do. Hand it to your ag agent, ask him to give his comments back and forth, get a 2 or 3, 4-page draft agreement, and then have him take it up the line for the authorities to decide. And my friends, I am telling you, that's a little bit of work, but that will pave the way for incredible opportunities, because when you run into roadblocks, when you run into challenges, you will find that it's the government agent that's going to come waving that MOU, say, wait a minute, these folks have an MOU with us, and you better unblock this roadblock for them and get them moving, you see. It's really worth doing this, even at the most local level. And regularly report your activities and progress. If you're doing an ag project in your community, maybe on a quarterly basis or semi-annual basis, write up a page or two about your progress, what you've done, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and drop by the ag office and give it to the government agent so he's informed. They really appreciate very simply written reports, so that if ever he gets called up by the governor or someone, he or she, they can say, yes, here's what they're doing. We know exactly. It's not just hearsay. Here's their last quarterly report. And you will find 9 times out of 10, the government entities will be your best friend and your support, especially in countries that can be very, very difficult to work in. And let me wrap up here. We're going to have, look for I forgot this one. Look for opportunities to build their capacity. When there's a training program, some of these agents, a health agent or an ag agent, their opportunities at an education are often not that good. If you're going to have a training program for farmers or for something, always invite the ag agent, or for health agents. Look for ways to build their capacity. At World Vision, we will act in our water programs, we will actually take the local district water agent and we'll send him off we'll pay him to go to another country for a 1-month intensive training if he needs it. Because enhancing their capacity at the end is going to enhance yours. So look for ways not just to build the capacity of the community, but the government agents you work with. Okay, a word about challenges. And I'm going to stop with this. There are challenges working with governments. A lot of governments are not always easy to work with. Before I get there, one point is remember that most government agents get paid a lot less than you do, and even your own employees. Government agents do not have high salaries. They are really living and working on a shoestring. And they work with very, very limited budgets. I mean, they're told to go out and implement all this, but they're given budgets that are impossible to work with. So they can be a very frustrated group of people. Are some governments and government entities corrupt or inept? Yes, you're going to run into some agents and some government people, a governor who's terribly corrupt and very hard to deal with. And sometimes these individuals will put up unreasonable obstacles. God's called you to work in this community. You feel that that's where he wants you to work, and the governor says, no, I'd rather you go over here and work in this. And you're trying to get your permits to work in this part of the country, and the governor's not signing off on it, and you have issues like that. But there is always an opportunity for development. I want to close with this story from an Islamic republic where we were working a number of years ago, back when the AIDS crisis, the AIDS pandemic or epidemic, what was it called? Was it a pandemic? You got any health people here? Anyway, when AIDS erupted around the globe. And of course, you know, this was a tough issue. I think many parts of the church were pretty slow to figure out how to deal with the AIDS issue, you know, because some of the, you know, ethical issues around the AIDS crisis. But the point is, very quickly, we saw that AIDS was hurting women and children perhaps more than anyone else. They were the ones that were suffering and paying for the AIDS epidemic. We were working in an Islamic republic that had two main port cities. And we were wondering if AIDS would occur in this country. This was very early on. This was in Africa. And it was an Islamic republic, and so we started doing some surveys kind of quietly. I'm not sure how we got permission to do it, but we started doing some testing, random testing, and we found out that in the two port cities of this country, there was an 18% infection rate in those cities. And it was coming in from sailors because these were port cities. And so we went straight to the Minister of Health and we said, sir, and we had a big health program in the country. We said, sir, we think you've got a serious problem with AIDS in your two largest cities, and we're here to help, but we just wanted to let you know. Do you know what he said to us? He said, we are an Islamic republic. We follow Allah's ways. There is no AIDS in an Islamic republic. Finish. And we were shown to the door. So what do? Do you shake the dust off your feet and walk away and say, well, what an ignorant person who doesn't care about his people? Now, that was probably true. Well, we went back and we prayed and said, God, we need some wisdom here because people's lives are at stake. And so we adopted a posture of humility. So rather than confronting him and going back and trying to go circumvent him or go to higher authorities or to get a meeting with the president or whoever, we thought, let's work with him and his staff. So whenever there was a report that came out from a big health organization or the United Nations kind of helping to explain the AIDS conundrum that was written in a polite way, we'd stick it in an envelope and drop it off at his office. We'd go by and invite him for a cup of tea. And in Muslim countries, people love to sit and have tea. And we say, oh, by the way, you know, I've got several copies of this report that came from the World Health Organization. You know, you make, you know, on child immunizations, on, you know, meningitis epidemics. Oh, there's one on AIDS here too, but anyway. And we just put it on his desk. And slowly over a year, we kind of subversively educated him on the AIDS pandemic. We would even send him, that was back in the days of videos, we'd send him video cassettes on a documentary on how other countries had successfully tackled AIDS. And so we befriended him in a non-aggressive way. Within 2 years, World Vision was commissioned by the Ministry of Health to start producing TV ads on the national television network on AIDS awareness. And you would see this crescent, so you'd have these ads on AIDS awareness, a crescent with the Islamic Republic Ministry of Health, World Vision, Christian Humanitarian Organization on the left. Here's what AIDS is all about, and we need to be aware of it in this country. So God opened up the door. So when you have corrupt or belligerent or non-cooperative people, God will give you wisdom. He will give you wisdom on how to deal with them. And he'll turn that conundrum into an opportunity for success and for you to be a blessing to the communities that you're called to serve. Okay, I didn't hear Buster, so I guess I made it in time. Over to you, or let me know how you want to do the Q&A.